House policy staff and others here with us today, and we expect a few other individuals to join us as well too, to talk about and to get a sneak peek about some zoning atlas work that we've been working on. For those who I don't know, I'm Brenda Clement, and I'm Director of HousingWorks Rhode Island at Roger Williams Universities. My apologies, I'm joining you from my car today because we just finished a tour around the Pawtucket Central Falls train station with the Roger Williams Law School as they were ending their housing justice challenge this semester. So an interesting conversation around gentrification and displacement, all of which are tied to zoning issues as well too around the Pawtucket Central Falls train station in my home community of Pawtucket. So it's a busy day, and as we know, a lot of interest in housing and land use and zoning and all of these topics. And so we're glad that you're joining us today to look at the sneak peek, but also really to help inform the conversation as we move forward. So we appreciate your time and attention today. Sorry, I hear my volume's really low. Try to fix that. Is that better? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you for your, thank you everyone. So again, thank you. And HousingWorks is a research and policy organization that works on all things housing and tries to show through our data and research the importance and the connectedness between housing and economic growth and development in the state, but also in improving the health and educational outcomes of our residents as well too. And so hopefully you're already familiar with our annual housing fact book that we release every year. My colleague Annette Bourne is joining us today as our Director of Research and Policy, and Annette takes the lead on our housing fact book development and other research projects as well too. And also joining us today from the HousingWorks team is Amy Cola, who does a myriad of things at HousingWorks, and including our communications and our outreach work. And then I'm going to save Bryce and Chris in a second. Bryce Kelly joined our team as a research analyst and has been leading our efforts around zoning work in concert with our colleague Chris Schutz, and I'll get back to them in a second. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why and how we started in this work. We started in this work probably now, and Bryce, correct me if I'm wrong, back, I think it was in 2018 or so, initially working on this project at the, or zoning issues with a project that we were doing at the request of Rhode Island Housing. And that work really piqued our interest on zoning and land use. And as we started to see challenges around affordability and looking at where we grow and where we develop as the state, we started to become aware of the work of the National Zoning Atlas project that Bryce will talk about and that Chris we'll talk about as well too, and why this matters and why land use and zoning are critical parts of the issue, or of how we'll work on solving housing issues and challenges in our state. So this, we know that housing and zoning rather isn't a silver bullet. It's not the only thing. Like, if we can't just press that Staples easy button and say, boy, if we just fix zoning, or if we just did this, then we'd be able to create all the affordable housing and all the housing that we need in the state. We know that that's not the case, but it's part of the package, right? It's part of the tools that we need to do and use. So, and so we'll dive in a little deeper to see what the current state of zoning is in the state, and how we may be able to use the National Zoning Atlas and other work. So a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce Bryce and Chris. One, we are recording this, so if your colleagues or you want to go back, you'll be able to, we'll be sending this out post the event. Thanks to Amy, who does all of those kinds of things for us. And then we also this is a sneak peek. We're only looking at kind of one county, Kent County in the state. Our plan and our hope is to have the full map for the state out by the fall. And we're inviting the founder of the National Zoning Atlas project to come to Rhode Island in October as part of our fact book release to talk more about the national work and the national project. So we also, as part of this process, will be setting up an advisory committee. And so we'll likely be tapping into some of the folks that I see on this call with the hopes that you'll be willing to share your expertise on this. But I think the ultimate goal is for all of us to come together to say, you know, where does it make sense, you know, for us to build and grow to address the immediate needs around housing for our fellow Rhode Islanders as well. So that's the reason why we're at this table, and I'm glad that you are here joining us on this journey as well too. So with that, I'd like to introduce both Bryce and Chris, who are going to go through the presentation. We're going to ask Bryce and Chris to go through the presentation first. And so I'd ask you to hold your questions until the end. I think chat's enabled, so you can put your questions in chat as we go along, if you'd like, and Annette and I will monitor the chat. But if you and we'll then be able to ask people to come off mute at the end of the presentation to ask your specific questions. So I already introduced Bryce a little bit, but we're happy to have Bryce join our team now a couple of years ago. He's a native Rhode Islander, had been in Florida for a while, but came back north. The reverse way that most Rhode Islanders go, Bryce, but glad to have him back in any case, and has dove in deep on the zoning and land use work as well too. It brings a lot of great skills and knowledge to the table. He also is involved in his local community and serves on some local boards and commissions in I'm going to get Richmond, right? Yes, Richmond, thank you. And so again, part of what we try to always do at HousingWorks is not only to do the work and the research, but to apply it in our communities as well too. And so, and then Chris Schutz works in his day job as at Church Community Housing Corporation in Newport, one of our premier nonprofit developers in Aquidneck Island as well too. But Chris came to us to offer his skills in GIS and mapping, and they have been invaluable for us for this project. So we're very grateful that Chris has joined the team and continues to add his expertise to this work. So with that, I'd ask if you're not talking that you also mute your phone, because I'm getting a little background as well too. But I will now turn it over to Bryce to get us started.
Thanks, Brenda. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Presentation mode. Is everyone able to see it? Looks good. Okay. Excellent. I just gotta reformat some of the video. All right. Thanks for the introduction. Again, my name's Bryce Kelly. I'm the research analyst at HousingWorks Rhode Island. I'll be walking through the aspects of this sneak peek. You know, my colleague Chris, if there's something that pops up and needs answering, I'm sure he'll jump in. But today we're talking about the Rhode Island Zoning Atlas. It's been a labor of love for quite a while. And as part of that process, we wanted to give everyone a sneak peek of Kent County. And I'll go over why Kent County was chosen. The little graphic right here just shows all the different teams that are engaged on the National Zoning Atlas. I think it's officially up to 24 states, with that number growing, you know, every month. So it's really exciting. I think right now we have Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Montana who have all officially released their statewide zoning atlas. So teams are progressing at a pretty quick pace. And so I wanted to quickly start with some thanks and credit. Obviously, you know, Chris Schutz has been invaluable for us here, really, you know, getting us all up to speed on the power of GIS and how to go about, you know, this project. He's been collecting data. He's been, you know, working on the shape files. He's been doing everything in terms of this project. So he's been extremely helpful. I also want to thank, you know, everyone on the HousingWorks team, Amy, Annette, Brenda. They've all really allowed us to really dive deep into this and get to the point where we're at right now, which is pretty close to being done. Also want to thank the municipal planners and staff. If you are a planner, you've probably heard from either Chris or I in the last year or so, pestering you with questions and asking for files and asking for you to look at some of the data we have. So that's been extremely helpful and has guided us and really ensured our ability to present this in the most accurate and nuanced way. Of course, the National Zoning Atlas, it's more of a collaborative. So, you know, we get support and guidance from the national team, but also all these other state teams. We're all contributing, you know, use cases from our state that might be applicable to another state. So that collaboration has been really, really helpful to getting to the point where we're at now. And then obviously we've taken a lot of inspiration from Desegregate Connecticut's original zoning atlas, as well as Massachusetts Housing Partnership's Transit-Oriented Development Explorer tool, their TODEX tool, as well as their Residency tool. I'll get a little bit into that further along in the presentation. And then with a lot of the data layers that we're using, we have to shout out, you know, Rhode, which is just a tremendous, you know, place to get all of this data and be able to figure out how, you know, all these different aspects of land use really intersect. And so Brenda was helpful in that she kind of backed us up and talked about how we got to where we're at. So I'll skip over some of this, but recently, you know, as of last year, we really began ramping up on our abilities of mapping of zoning, specifically for residential development broken out in that 1, 2, and 3 or more family category, as well as other really important aspects to residential development. I'll go over in a little bit, but, you know, pulling in transit, pulling in environmental layers, pulling in infrastructure, all these really important aspects to, you know, why certain things are zoned the way they are. But again, to back up, in 2021, Desegregate Connecticut published the first statewide zoning atlas. Sarah Bronin, who Brenda mentioned, was at the helm of that effort. She's since moved into a director position for the National Zoning Atlas. She's really the maestro that moves all these parts. And then we joined as the Rhode Island team for the National Zoning Atlas project in 2022. As she mentioned, as Brenda mentioned, work is well underway with an expected release in the fall of 2023. I'll quickly just mention that this graphic on the side, the lower right-hand side, that is a snippet of what the Connecticut Zoning Atlas looks like. And so you can see, you know, it's a very highly interactive, very user-friendly interface that you can click conditions that you're interested in to find out, you know, where you can build one family, what the minimum lot size is, you know, where you can build ADUs. So it's so wide, you know, it encompasses so much, but it does so in a way that, you know, a lot of different people from different walks of life can really understand. And so to that point, the Zoning Atlas is really designed to help communities visualize how zoning codes allow or restrict different types of housing at its most basic level. So why are we talking about around Zoning Atlas, and why are we looking specifically at Kent County? A zoning atlas really offers the democratization of information. Zoning information, zoning ordinances can be really a chore to read and understand. They're not standardized municipality to municipality. A city or town might reference the same thing in a different way, depending on where you are. So what this Rhode Island Zoning Atlas seeks to do is to make sometimes cumbersome zoning information really available, accessible, digestible to all. It also offers the opportunity to look at and analyze zoning across borders. So a lot of the times, you know, regardless of you know, what walk of life you come from, if you're a policymaker, a developer, resident, advocate, you're not necessarily familiar with the zoning outside of the maybe one or handful of jurisdictions that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so what having a statewide zoning atlas really will do is open up kind of your you know, level of understanding geographically. And then this really is for us a launching off point. The National Zoning Atlas has a methodology in terms of what data you collect, how you present it, which is super, super helpful and super effective. But we really want to kind of continue to evolve it and take it a step further to make it really Rhode Island specific. That comes with integrating parcel level data, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as well as data related to infrastructure, transit, environmental, census data, pulling in our own data that we compile in the housing fact book to really create a more contextual and nuanced look at zoning throughout the state. And then why are we looking at Kent County versus, a Washington, a Providence County, a Newport County? And it really comes primarily from our regional perspective, really this regional lens that we want to look at the state through, and we think is highly effective. And an analysis of Kent County offers that compelling snapshot of zoning and land use policies, specifically across rural, exurban, and suburban communities, all within one region. So it's indicative of a lot of the different types of communities that we have throughout Rhode Island. And then it really does a good job at kind of presenting at least the start of a conversation for cross-municipal collaboration. So understanding zoning from a regional or a cross-municipal perspective. When I say regional, it doesn't necessarily refer to the county as a whole. It might be a collection of municipalities, maybe on the coast that share, a lot of the same economic conditions or what have you. It's just looking at land use and zoning through a perspective of how these jurisdictions may work together to provide more comprehensive land use policies and take what they share in common and kind of bring it to the surface and celebrate that. And then Kent County also offers a really interesting look at historical development patterns. So we know zoning, in the context of New England specifically, is a relatively new concept. Early 1900s, it'll be enacted throughout, most of the state, or most of really the United States. And so Kent County is home to many settlement patterns that actually predate zoning and therefore really offer that unique understanding of what impact land use policies have had. You think about the mill villages and the mill settlements along the Patuxent River. Think about a lot of the development settlement patterns along Post Road. Those all probably predate zoning themselves. And those are also some of our denser communities within Kent County. And so a couple key points about the maps that we're going to show. The first set of maps are going to have to do with use regulations, which is a large part of what the zoning atlas focuses on what can be built where. Maps in the sneak peek will focus on residential uses as of right, as well as those that require a public hearing. Public hearing is kind of what the zoning atlas uses in terms of the terminology. It is also a special use permit, which a lot of us are maybe more familiar with in Rhode Island. We're also going to offer a quick glimpse at some of the information that we can offer in static form. Obviously, this map in its finished product will be an interactive map where you can click through things. But in a static form, we're going to offer a glimpse at what some of the dimensional regulations that this project collects and can display. Specifically in the sneak peek, we're going to be showing minimum lot sizes, and that really contributes heavily to understanding how restrictive or permissive zoning is, as well as, understanding what that permissible density is. So, kind of a hypothetical density where there's no constraints. How many units could you fit, and then off to the right here is just a glimpse visually at some of the other dimensional regulations and regulations that the National Zoning Atlas and the Rhode Island Zoning Atlas collects and has available in the data that we kind of ladder up into eventually that interactive map. And then finally, the last map that we're going to be showing is pertaining to density. So we're going to be previewing the future intentions of what we want to do in this space of zoning analysis. And that's going to show how permissible density, so, the permissible zoning density interacts with existing residential density in one community within Kent County. So moving on to our first map. So this map, and I'll quickly explain what's off to the right. These are just charts that will show the by right uses for single family, two family, and three or more family, as well as how much land is protected. I'll quickly explain. So what we consider protected and what we're mapping here with respect to protected lands is local conservation lands, state conservation lands, federal lands, as well as zoning districts that are open space or really passive recreation. They're not really developable. And so we're trying to give communities as much of a fair shake in terms of this. So really trying to capture all of that land within each municipality that would be considered protected in some shape or form. And so these charts off to the right, the first being for Kent County, the second being for an east subregion. So, anyone familiar with Kent County probably realizes that, the east and west are kind of dramatically different in terms of, rural versus suburban and development patterns. So we have broken this out between the east subregion and the west subregion as well. The percentage of unprotected land is zoned for that single family, two family, and three family as of right. And then to the map. So this map just shows single family zoning in Kent County. So that light blue will show where it's allowed by right. The gray is going to be where a public hearing is required, that special use permit's required. And then anything that's not filled in is prohibited, as well as the green being protected. So we can see that, the vast majority of Kent County, almost 90% is zoned for single family development. So we'll move on to two family zoning, and we can see that the areas that it's allowed by right significantly contract and change in Kent County. So here, the darker blue is going to represent that those areas that allow for two family development by right in Kent County. Gray again is public hearing and transparent or not filled in is going to be your prohibited areas for two family development. And so we can see, adding the public hearing, adding, the areas that require a special use permit is really important, because you can see just how much of Kent County, allows for it with a public hearing, with a special use permit. So it is still possible, but it's not necessarily in that as of right category. And you'll see, so 2.3% of Kent County is zoned for two family by right of unprotected land again. And then finally, three family zoning, three or more family zoning in Kent County. So again, not that much land. We're looking at 1.6% now, primarily on that eastern subregion, West Warwick, East Greenwich, with less in the west that allows for it by a special use permit or a public hearing, but still significant portions throughout West Warwick, even Eastern Coventry rather, allow with that public hearing. And so here's just a continuation of some of those charts, but now broken out municipality to municipality. I think it's really compelling to look at the West region and see just how much protected land there is. You have Arcadia, you have all these areas over there that are really constrained in terms of how much of it is protected, and for good reason. I mean, a lot of these fall outside of the urban services boundary. And I should mention that a really interesting thing that links Kent County together is the fact that it's one of only, I believe, two counties where all of the municipalities are either fully contained in or are partially touched by the urban services boundary. But you can see that kind of play out right in these charts in terms of denser development patterns, as well as protected land and reliance on single family zoning. And so the next series of maps are going to take a look at lot size, minimum lot size, as it pertains just to single family zoning. So the methodology for the National Zoning Atlas, what will eventually be shown with the Rhode Island Zoning Atlas, will show minimum lot sizes for all different types. So single family all the way up to those denser multifamily options. But for here, we're just showing a glimpse at single family to kind of draw distinctions between that western side and the eastern side of Kent County. And so here we see, 86% of the area in that western side that allows for single family by right also requires 2 or more acres, with only 14% really in that pocket of eastern Coventry that allows for a single family with less than 2 acres. It changes dramatically. We used a different kind of cut point for the eastern side, that being a ½ acre. So 64% of those areas zoned for single family by right in that western or West Warwick, East Greenwich area require more, or a ½ acre or more, whereas 36% only require less than ½ an acre. So this is a pretty compelling and visually distinctive look at how minimum lot sizes just change dramatically depending on the type of community that you're looking at, and even within that community, kind of the zoning within that community as well. And so lastly, and this is kind of where we intend on going in the future, is a look at some of the density analysis that we intend on doing. And so for this example, this is in East Greenwich. This is that Hill and Harbor area in East Greenwich along Main Street. And here we're mapping essentially existing density against that permissible zoning density. Again, taking into account, the most permissible use with the lowest, smallest lot size when we're talking about permissible density, the parcel size to get, hypothetically how many units could fit on that parcel. And so just a quick explainer of kind of how, because we're really laying 2 different things over one another, and how you would read this is using that legend off to the right, that really kind of grayish pinkish color is where you're going to see parcels that have low existing density and low permissible density, low zoning permissible density. Where you have that darker blue shade on a parcel is going to be where there is low existing density but high permissible density. And for a lot of these parcels that show up really blue in this area, it's public land, it's municipal land, it's a sewage treatment center, it's so it is zoned to allow for residential density, but in effect never really will have residential as part of that parcel. And then where you see a really pink parcel that pops is going to be where there's high existing density and low permissible density. And that's kind of part and parcel of what we're trying to get at with some of these more historical areas throughout Rhode Island, as well as, a lot of these areas were settled prior to zoning. And so the density is just what the density was. It was what what those settlement patterns warranted at that time. And so you're getting higher density in those areas. And then finally, where you see a darker purple shade, that's going to be where there's kind of a congruent, a complementary high existing density and high permissible density. Obviously, with the cut points that we're using here and how we're calculating this by, no density, so 0, 1 unit, 2 to 5 units, and 6 or more. When you get to that really purple parcel, it could be the fact that that parcel allows for maybe by zoning hypothetically 6 units, but in reality it has 18. It's going to still show up as kind of congruent. But we think this is a really interesting way to start to look at how zoning interacts with our traditional settlement patterns, or our traditional areas in Rhode Island that are really beloved, but you hear it time and time again, they couldn't be built today. And so this is just an initial look, a test case of how this analysis could look like. I think it's, and I should mention that this really marries a lot of what we're doing with the Rhode Island Zoning Atlas according to the Zoning Atlas methodology, along with the methodology that Massachusetts Housing Partnership is using with their residentity in terms of calculating density, parcel-based density in dwelling units per acre using tax assessor data, E911 data, which is what we did here. And then moving on, so this is really where we want to move, maybe not at a large scale in terms of mapping all of Rhode Island like this, but definitely kind of highlighting different areas throughout Rhode Island that could benefit from this type of analysis. And then next steps. So I think I mentioned our data entry is pretty much complete. There's roughly 100 data points, and these have to do with zoning districts, their uses, their regulations. So that's basically been collected. We'll probably do one last run through before we're ready to publish to make sure that we haven't missed any recent amendments, integrating as much as possible, whatever happens with the state. And then we're continuing to clean and verify the remaining zoning shapefiles. We still have a handful of municipalities where we have to, verify that the zoning shapefiles match official zoning maps, so that everything is accurate and ready to go. And then inputting data into the National Zoning Atlas portal. So the National Zoning Atlas has actually set up a really interesting portal for data entry. So we'll be entering that data in, zoning data, shape files, zoning ordinance text, so hundreds of pages of zoning ordinance text, and then the zoning maps as well. So it's really comprehensive in how it collects information. And then finally, we'll be finalizing protected lands just to make sure that we've got all our bases covered. We've really tried to be as accurate about accounting for protected lands in Rhode Island, considering there are so many areas where it's so heavily protected. And so we'll do one final verification across the state for that. And then lastly, we'll just be continuing to work and engage with stakeholders and gaining partners. Brenda mentioned some of our efforts in that space, and we're looking forward to kind of continuing the conversation up until the eventual release in the fall. But with that, Brenda, Annette, I can stop sharing, or I can keep the presentation up in case we need to go back to any slides.
Why don't we keep it up for a few minutes to see if there's any particular questions? I just thank you, Bryce. A lot of, we're diving in deep, right, on this and land use, and so we appreciate the feedback. Chris, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say hi, and if there's anything else that you wanted to add before we open it up for questions.
Hi everyone, my name's Chris, project co-manager with Bryce, and sharing duties with the zoning code analysis, geospatial analysis. So appreciate the HousingWorks team for this opportunity, and also National Zoning Atlas folks for as always being very available and very helpful, and look forward to hearing everyone's feedback.
And if I can just piggyback off what Chris said about the National Zoning. So Sarah Bronin continues to answer just individual teams' questions on a constant basis. She's so available. She's an expert in her field, and she's made herself critical to a lot of different state teams in terms of how helpful she's been.
Yeah, agreed. And we're looking forward to welcoming Sarah to Rhode Island, like we said, hopefully this fall as well too, but really wonderful project and wonderful idea, and very committed to the work. So before I open it up for questions, and I know I already saw one in the chat, but I did want to acknowledge our Roger Williams colleague, but also in her wearing her hat as a state representative, June Speakman, I know is on the call, and June, among many things, has been working on housing issues and chairing the Housing Commission, first called the Low Mod Commission, and now the Housing Commission. And so June, we expect and hope that we'll have lots of discussions about this at the commission as things move forward as well too. So so let's open it up. I know I saw, like I said, I saw a question from Ray, I think, about mobile home parks. And how, with the exception of West Warwick and Kent County, we have at least one mobile home park in the other 4, and how will those be mapped? So Bryce, do you want to try to respond?
Yeah, so there's an opportunity for us within the zoning atlas methodology to actually map those areas that I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, we would be mapping them as planned residential development districts, I think now. But yeah, we'll definitely be able to map those. And to your point, Ray, I mean, when we do, so we're going to be having this Rhode Island Zoning Atlas live through the National Zoning Atlas website, but we're also going to retain a version of this on HousingWorks website where we'll be able to add additional layers that we find relevant. And so one of those layers easily could be mapping of mobile home parks, manufactured housing parks throughout the state.
Thank you, Ray. Hopefully that addresses your concern. So, so please feel free to either drop a question in the chat or to raise your hand. And Annette, if you can help me monitor in case I don't see everyone, if you have any other comments or questions. We've stunned you into silence.
I'll throw out a question. Hi, this is Claudia Wack. Bryce and the rest of the HousingWorks team. First of all, thank you so much. This is great work, and it's going to be a great resource, I can tell. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about how you were treating mixed use zones. I know, in some places, people are still separating commercial from residential in a relatively strict way, whereas others have gravitated more towards allowing those uses to blend. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how those blended mixed use zones have been treated by your analysis.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It was actually something that I brought up this morning before we started this webinar. So the National Zoning Atlas, the methodology and what Rhode Island will have actually separates all zoning districts into 3 categories: primary residential, mixed with residential, and non-residential. And so we have the ability to map the state that way too. So you'll be able to click in the interactive portion of the map and say, I want to see all the zoning districts in Rhode Island that are mixed with residential, and then see the qualities about those zoning districts that you're interested in. We do treat in terms of specifically how we treat some multifamily uses in mixed use. We'll typically use those mixed use districts and treat them as multifamily if it allows for housing above businesses. So that's how we use it on that side. But yeah, definitely once this is live and released, you'll be able to find every zoning district in the state that is a mixed use zoning district.
Thanks, Bryce. Claudia, any follow-up, or does that help to address your question?
I think that addresses it. So I look forward to being able to look around.
We probably do. Thank you. Any others? I know I see a number of colleagues from municipal government on the call, and so we're very curious about your reaction to and whether or not and what we can do to continue to improve this tool. Anyone want to share any comments?
Brenda, I just want to provide a follow-up. So like we talked a lot about regional collaboration, regional outlooks, and stuff like that. Another really important and interesting aspect of the current progress in the National Zoning Atlas is that every single New England state is currently engaged on it. And I think we're the only region in the country where every state is engaged in working on it in different forms of completion. So that's actually really exciting to kind of start to think of regionalism from a grander perspective as well. So how does Rhode Island compare to Connecticut and Massachusetts? How does Vermont compare to Maine and New Hampshire? I think that's going to open the doors to a lot more conversations as well.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, not only thinking, regionally and collaboratively within the state, but within our bigger New England region is definitely the strength of this tool. So any other thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Annette, did you want to? Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead,
As you've been going through this, have you noticed any trends that are particularly striking or surprising, or related to HousingWorks's work with affordable housing?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what you would expect in terms of where uses are a lot more dense uses are allowed within that kind of USB area, with a lot larger minimum lot sizes and mostly single family zoning outside of it. I think what strikes me without trying to get too much into
before you continue, could you
Mhm.
explain very briefly USB for those who are
the
not
urban services boundary. Yeah, so the urban services boundary, that delineation within the state that development is directed towards, that has infrastructure, public water, public sewer. There are pockets of the USB that emerge outside of that larger area, and with some growth centers as well. But yeah, that's basically what it is. I also, what strikes me, I think the most is just how the delineations of municipalities really dictate zoning and how dramatically it can shift just based on crossing a river or crossing this invisible border. Zoning will be dramatically different. Land use will be tackled dramatically in a different way. And I just think that that's fascinating. I hesitate to offer any, kind of policy oriented takeaways just yet. Again, we don't have the whole zoning atlas stood up yet, and really just have kind of this snapshot of Kent County and a couple other municipalities that we're further along in. But to me, yeah, it is, the lack of cohesion between neighboring municipalities in terms of zoning. And I think that's pretty evident from a lot of the maps.
Thank you. Annette, I didn't know if you wanted to make
Brenda,
any comments.
Well, no, but I do want to recognize that we have a number of people in the queue. Andy Tights, and then Mike DeLuca, and then June Speakman. So Andy, please proceed.
Okay.
Sure. I guess my question or comment is about counties. I don't know if that's driven because of the national project, but because so many places have county governments and county zonings. But it just doesn't seem to work well in Rhode Island. Our counties have no governmental jurisdiction. And the very fact that you even had to split little Kent County into east or west to make sense of it, that seems to be like extra work with the east-west subdivision. If you have to use counties to match the national, fine. But then it's as your comments just were, the difference is so much from town to town. East and west sub-regions of counties don't really make much difference here in Rhode Island. And, stuff like Providence County is so big and so broad, it doesn't seem to make a distinction.
Well,
Actually,
I think,
Bryce, do you mind if I just take a first stab at that?
yeah.
So Andy, the regions actually stem from the US Census Bureau publishes census data that is crossed with housing data in a data set that is called the public use microdata. I always want to say survey, but I know it doesn't, PUMS. And we've been using this in the housing fact book for a number of years now. It allows us to cross-tabulate data for housing across larger areas and gives us much less margins of error. Once you get down to those smaller areas, especially the 39 municipalities here, margins of error can kind of really go up a lot. So, and with all respect to the fact that we don't have county governance outside of, I think, our judiciary for a certain amount, there are those regions of the state, Aquidneck Island, Washington County, who have looked at themselves in a regional way for the benefit of land use. West Warwick and Warwick may be two municipalities, but they used to actually be one municipality. We don't pretend to think that we're going to accomplish a new governance here, but for the sake of land use and for the sake of housing data, this is what we're putting forth right now. Sorry, Bryce, please continue.
I think you hit on everything, I was about to say. I think
So is the sub-regions connected to that housing data? Is that why you have the
no,
sub-regions?
that was based on just typography. That was based on we wanted to break it up in terms of specifically how we looked at minimum lot size to make that distinction a little bit more clear. And protected land, quite frankly, in Kent County, it's unique in that there is one
Right.
part of Kent County that has a significantly larger amount of protected land than the other.
Right. Okay.
And so
Thank
this
you.
was really just, it was in service of kind of our idea of how effective a regional and collaborative perspective of land use could be.
I just think also you might want to, when you're connected with the national stuff, you probably might want to have some sort of note up front. And it's not just Rhode Island, the fact that, but most of the New England states do not have county zoning, where most of the country does have county zoning. So that might be some sort of note up front for people to notice.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, Sarah, the founder, Sarah, comes from Connecticut, so she's well aware of these challenges, I think, from a New England perspective. And as we said, now that all the New England states are participating, we look forward to kind of more New England conversations on this. But thank you, Andy, for your comments as always. So I'm not sure who was first, but I'm going to let ladies go next. So June Speakman, and then we'll call on Mike DeLuca.
Okay, I think Mike was first, but I'll be quick. I just
Okay.
I want to thank you very much for this work. At the commission that Brenda referred to, we always confront these, where is the best place to build housing? And then what are the obstacles to doing it there? And this really, I think I can see how this is going to help inform that analysis. With all due respect to my friend Andy, I do think a broader lens, as Annette always says, is wise. And this, when Bryce put up those maps of that county or that large area, it was sort of the development patterns were becoming clearer to me. And this is going to give us a lens that we haven't had available before at the commission. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you for the work. Thank you, Bryce, for your clear explanations as well. Thanks, Brenda.
Thanks. Thank you, Rep. And Mike, your thoughts or comments?
Hi. I was going to defer to Rep. Speakman anyway, so I'm glad you just jumped in. And good points from Andy and Rep. Speakman. I was going to ask a somewhat generic question, but since they've kind of opened the door, I'm going to focus it a little bit. My generic question was going to be, has Christopher or Bryce looked at the other states that have completed their work to see what other data sets are generated in those states that would be complementary to the 3 that you have done so far? And now I'll go to the focus, and Representative Speakman will appreciate this. I think we've already had this conversation, because I think the information being shown here is leading us in certain direction, in the thinking process, and that has to do with where are the opportunities. I know the Housing Commission is looking at that, but one of the key constraints to opportunity is utility service. And even though the areas that are zoned higher density or developed to higher density, as Bryce has shown us, are in the areas we are pretty familiar with, the downtown areas, historic downtowns that go back several hundred years, whatever, it doesn't always translate directly to sewer or water capacity. And those are the 2 key things in higher density that will either make or break the development. And sometimes the capacity isn't the sewage treatment plant itself or the water source, it's the transmission lines. If we're going to use this information to go in that direction, I absolutely believe we need information about the 2 key utilities that make higher density development actually work. So 2-part question, Bryce and Christopher, have you seen the other states and what they may have done in terms of expanded databases? And then my final thought there. So however you'd like to respond, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. So to respond to the first one, yes, we're constantly in communication and watching what other states are doing and how they're collecting information, really how they're presenting it. We tuned into New Hampshire's zoning atlas release, was it last week, to see how they presented all their information. And, it's not necessarily that we're all using different data sets, because really it's just zoning ordinance text, shape files, and analysis, really. But it's how, we're accounting for other aspects that are specific to each of our respective states. And so taking, inspiration from New Hampshire that probably is a little bit closer to what we're dealing with here in Rhode Island than, say a far more urbanized county level state, is kind of how we're going about it. In terms of infrastructure, I think we're working within the framework of the National Zoning Atlas right now. And I mentioned it earlier, but we really intend on standing up an additional version of this map on our website, where we can then start to work through infrastructure. We can work through all these municipal specific things that influence why something's zoned a certain way, where development has occurred versus where development should occur. And I think that's really where we're looking forward to a lot of collaboration with municipalities and with the state and with subject matter experts to really hone in on specifically, what are your concerns and how can we best visualize those in this version of the map. But in terms of, the Rhode Island Zoning Atlas as part of the National Zoning Atlas map, it's kind of cut and dry what we're showing, right? We have the ability to show a couple of different fields as it pertains to zoning, but we're really told to stick to the zoning. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I kind of expected that would be the answer, that you're trying to be consistent with all the other states that have done the same work. I just wanted to know if they had expanded beyond the 3 data sets that you had already done.
There's some flexibility to include other things, but really the pie in the sky goal of the National Zoning Atlas, right, is to create a national zoning atlas where everything's standardized and you can compare state to state, region to region. And so part of that is kind of hindering how far you can get, into the ether, into other topics.
Yeah, and that's, Mike, to your point, that's why we want to kind of retain and be able to customize it a little bit more on our own map, our own website and map, so that it's a tool that adds the comments and questions that you raised around infrastructure and other water, sewer, but electric grids and other things as well too. Sea level rise, all of these kinds of other issues that we know we need to be addressing as a state as things move forward. So we're well aware that we need to kind of Rhode Islandize this as we go forward, as I'm sure our colleagues in other states are seeing as well too. So again, a sneak peek where it's still a work in progress, and we're trying to take these comments and these feedback and try to refine the tool even more.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that.
Yep. I don't see any other hands. Am I missing anything? Anybody in that? I don't think I am. Any other comments or thoughts? If not, Bryce, do you want to do any wrap up or last minute comments?
Yeah, sure. So I think we're anticipating kind of wrapping up this presentation today in some kind of facts and figures, by the numbers, PDF kind of thing that we can that people can visit and refer back to, with a little bit more, data and sources, how we did it, stuff like that. Not too much editorializing, just really sticking to, the maps that we've produced, the charts that we've produced, the data. And so hopefully that will be a helpful resource in the coming weeks for people to refer back to and kind of envision what their own communities would look like, until we actually have the full map created. But other than that, no, I don't have too much. I'm just, looking forward to getting this over the finish line. And having it be useful for everyone.
Just wanted to
Thanks.
quickly
And
just
Chris, I'm not sure what you dropped into the chat. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, just wanted to add, so, and get a link to this later, I'm sure Bryce's follow-up document, but, just to, if anybody wants to look a little further into the methodology, there's a document called How to Make a Zoning Atlas, the folks over at the National Zoning Atlas created, that's been our guiding light, so, that's helpful to understand the breakdown, get a look at the metrics everyone's looking at, and, yes, may answer any questions other folks may have.
Great. Thank you. And thanks again to Chris and Bryce for leading this work. We, again, at HousingWorks, we try to add tools and resources to the conversation about how to address housing and community development challenges that exist in our community. And so we're hopeful and confident that this will be an important new tool to the conversation. So stay tuned, lots more to come, including the release of the full map in the fall. And we'll be keeping you up to date throughout the summer as that work develops. But again, we appreciate your comments and time today, and look forward to continuing to work with many of you as this moves forward. With that, I'll give you back some time today for you to take a look, and again, look for a follow-up from us with more information and details. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.